Good evening, and welcome to this week's episode of Thursday Talk. I believe we're having some brief technical difficulties. I was just talking to Dan a minute ago, and he appears to have dropped off. He's back in. He's waiting in the wings. Okay, so we'll bring him back in. He just did a little hurrah thing, so he can see what I'm doing at the moment. So we'll have Dan in a sec. Before we get started, though, about half an hour ago, AOPA, Ben Morgan, made an announcement that I think needs to be heard. Absolutely needs to be heard. There's been some news come out today regarding CASA and requesting information from GA pilots who are involved in community service flights. Now, I'm not a GA pilot. I don't know the ins and outs of community service flights, but I do know we have quite a few GA pilots who do watch this stream. And contrary to the impression that I may have given last week when I made my post about AOPA, I do support what AOPA are trying to achieve. I think it's really important that if you are involved in community service flights, in light of the news that has come out about CASA requesting information, that if this affects you, that you absolutely seek advice and make sure that what you are doing is the right thing for you. I am certain that if you reach out to AOPA, they will be more than happy to help you with that. I think it's really, as I said, I think it's really important that we make sure that everybody's doing the right thing, and that includes CASA. That's all I'm going to say about that. If that is something that affects you, please go and watch AOPA's stream that they put up about half an hour ago. It's recorded. It is on their page. I thoroughly encourage anybody to make sure that they're absolutely certain that they know what they're doing before they make a choice. Moving right along. Tonight, we're going to do something a little bit different. So usually we do interviews, and tonight is still an interview, but it's a little bit different to how we usually run this section. Something I've been talking to Dan about for a while is talking to Dan about drawing on some of his experiences in the past when things haven't quite gone right, and things have gone sideways, and how you deal with that, and what happens afterwards, and what's the toll, what's the long-term effects, personal and social effects on what happens when something goes wrong, and things can go very wrong. So the introduction is for this week's episode of Thursday Talk. We're going to reintroduce Dan Compton for something a little bit different. Dan Compton is an accomplished pilot, having flown for the RAAF and eventually progressing on to run his own flying school, Wings Out West. Over Dan's time flying, he's had a thing or two go wrong, just one or two, and he's found himself in a couple of sticky situations. This is an opportunity to talk about the not so nice side of aviation and talk about what happens when it doesn't all go to plan and things go sideways, how we deal with it, how you process the aftermath, and most importantly, how we learn out of that as a result. Please welcome Dan back to the stream. As always, please like and share this video. And if you have a question, please add it in the comments in the thread on the main page, not a share. If it's a share on Bushfires or Pilots Lounge, we might not see it. And if it's a suitable question, I'll pass it on. If you like this content, would like to see somebody or know somebody that you think would be a good subject for this series, please drop me a message and we'll see what we can do about getting them in for a chat. So, without any further ado, g'day, Dan.
G'day, everyone.
How are you this evening?
Yeah, going good, thanks, George.
You look a bit nervous.
Yeah, well, after that introduction, I've got to try and live up to it.
A lot of people hold you in very high regard. I'm not sure why, you know. So standard sort of introduction. We'll kick this off as if it was a standard interview. Who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So yeah, I'm just another guy who got interested in aeroplanes when I was very young. I don't come from a flying family, so it was just something that came very young. I always wanted to join the Air Force, but when I was about 16, I kind of felt like I wasn't going to cut the mustard, so I actually left school and did my commercial pilot's license. And after I did my commercial pilot's license, I thought perhaps I could have done my HSC. So I went back to school and did my HSC and joined the Air Force. So I sort of got trained a couple of times. Yeah, spent my time in the Air Force. It was an interesting career, and there was lots of things I didn't do that I wanted to do, and there was different things that I did do that I didn't expect to do, and it was all good. You know, the friends you make and everything's all good. Yeah, you learn a lot in the Air Force. These incidents and stuff we'll talk about. Very good. The safety culture and everything in the Air Force was being redeveloped the whole time I was there, and it was very, very good because it stemmed out of a lot of terrible accidents that happened in the 80s and 90s. And the Air Force was way ahead of the game in the no blame culture of reporting what went wrong. So yeah, that was a really good experience. So after the Air Force, I did a few years with the Flying Doctor Service. I shouldn't probably make comment, but I'll make one little comment. The culture in the Flying Doctor Service I found was not the same as the Air Force. They were trying to introduce a system very similar to the way the Air Force reporting system was, but the blame culture and stuff like that still had some time to develop, I think. And I don't know where it's at the moment, but yeah, the problem we've got in the civil system between companies like the RFT, you know, I shouldn't label the RFTS, you know, I'm not saying they're bad. It's a culture that's within GA, probably elsewhere, but and driven a little bit by CASA, I think, is very blamey and witch hunting. Like as soon as something goes wrong, they're out to blame somebody on that, and that sometimes I just still went with the RAAF culture of report everything, but I found a lot of people around me were sort of going, no, don't say anything, you know, and you know, and that's what we just heard tonight, like with the AOPA thing, you know, it's saying, oh, don't answer any questions with CASA, like they're out hunting for something, and that's pretty sad, really. That's how we view our regulator. Is that, and I don't blame people for not wanting to talk to them. I actually think that it's wise advice off AOPA to button your lips and only say what you have to say, because unfortunately the culture from our regulators and that hasn't changed yet. And until regulators change their attitude and become more like the Defence Force was, and that with a no blame, easy reporting culture where people feel that they can actually say what actually happened and not be hunted down for it and put in jail, sort of thing, it'll be really, really good. So if that's part of our discussion tonight, that'll be good, you know. And even with our discussion tonight, I should just preempt it a little bit and say we've already talked about this, Josh and I. For everybody out there, you know, I'll be pretty careful about what I say tonight, because I know that, you know, I'll only talk about things that I know have already been investigated and everything. Because, you know, if we try and have an honest discussion like this to educate each other and slip up and say something that we haven't reported or whatever, then next thing, you know, you're getting hunted for that. And that's a pretty sad state of affairs, I think. But that's the way it is. So until we change the culture right all the way to the top, yeah, and I think it has the start at the top and feed down to industry. Yeah. But anyway, enough of the political talk. That's who I am, and that's what I'm planning on doing tonight. So
yep.
Yeah.
And I think we'll also talk. I'm at least going to talk a little bit about one of my experiences and my conversations that I've had with RAAOs about this exact topic and sort of their approach to dealing with these kinds of problems. Because in my experience, and I can't speak for all RAAOs pilots, but in my experience, RAAOs have been very tolerant's probably not the right word, but they've been very open and honest and transparent around how the processes work, and you know that they're not in RAAOs as an entity don't tend to go on witch hunts. In my experience, anyway, I can't speak for others. I know there are a lot of people who are very critical of RAAOs, but in my experience, it's not been the CASA-esque, you know, you did this at this time. We want, you know, reams of paperwork to prove that you didn't. RAAOs are more likely to turn around and say, well, maybe don't do that again.
Yeah. I find we can discuss things with the relevant people in RAAOs. Like I've got a good open line of discussion with Jill and Darren and all the relevant people, and we can tend to discuss things out and work through things a lot better Whereas a big organisation like CASA is a lot of faceless people, and unfortunately, everybody's just trying to do their job. But yeah, until a culture changes, the people in the job even probably think they're doing the right thing. But anyway, enough said. That's all political. So
we'll move away from the politics.
Yeah.
Whereabouts are you based?
Right, I'm based just out of Dubbo. I've got my own little strip, Wings Out West, which has managed to creep its way into all the charts now. Even the new WAC charts have got it. So, I developed my own little strip in that just because I had the land to do it, and I'm lazy and I can just walk to work and don't have to drive to the airport. But also, it's really good because the way I teach has got that leans towards the bush flying and that anyway. So it's why not start people on a bush strip? We do go and do circuits, airports, and everything just because it is safer, and that's wise to be safe when you're trying to get someone up to their first solo. But every arrival and departure is back at Wings Out West, so people, by default, get that introduction into bush flying. Just sort of creeps in there, and before they know it, they're landing back here on my strip, and sort of by their fourth solo, they'll fly out of here. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
And not just bush flying in a bush plane. And I do believe you've just taken delivery of a new one.
Yeah, I've got Moac, as it's called, the mother of all cubs, and we've nicknamed it Moac Down Under because it's the first one down here. But yeah, it's just that it's another super legend. So with the higher horsepower, the 187 horsepower, Phil Yates is saying he can't find me on Oz Runways.
He can.
Oh, he can. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I can't read. Phil. I've lost my track now with Phil there.
Oh,
but Moac, it's just another cub. We've got the bigger engine in it and longer legs on it, and it's got a heap more baggage capacity. It's got a third seat option, which is just a little dicky seat. They have been flying around with 3 adults in it, but I sort of view the dicky seat down the back as more for my little fella Briggsy. It seems very suitable for that job. So it's a really, really cool plane. Unfortunately, with the third seat and the takeoff weight of 2,000, max takeoff weight of 2,000 pounds, which is a bit over 900 kilos. Unfortunately, it's well outside of RAAF's thing, so I've had to register at VH experimental. But the time will come. Our weight limit will get up there eventually, and these aircraft will hopefully end up in RAAFs. But so that's the mother of all cubs. No doubt people have seen the big red thing floating around the internet.
Yeah, cool. And last question before we get into the experiences. How did you get involved with RAAFs?
Oh, years ago, back when it was the AUF. We were on holiday, and I saw some little drifters operating out of a strip near Dreamworld, and it was very much a bush strip where they were. In fact, the strip was so small they couldn't do circuits there. We had to go out to the beach and do circuits on the beach.
Oh,
and
wow.
And I just saw it, and I was already a commercial pilot at the time, and this is when I was back at school doing my HSC to get in the Air Force. But when I saw these drifters, I just fell in love with them straight away. I thought, what a fantastic machine. And I did about 10 hours with the guys there and got my AUF pilot certificate at the time. And and that just stuck with me a lot. And I never got to really touch any of the ultralights again, other than a few friends down at Sale. A friend had a Foxbat and a few things like that. And so when I came up here to Dubbo, I just looked at it, and I had a friend, ex-Air Force friend, who was up at Northern Rivers Aero Club, and he said, "Why don't you come up and do your RAAFs instructor rating with me?" And I thought, yeah, why not? And because I always wanted to be an instructor, and recreational seems to be the way to go. It's more fun, and you're a lot of the time you're just teaching recreational pilots, which is good because they're there for the fun of it and everything. And so, I did that, and it took a little while to actually turn that into doing something with it. But yeah, once I got back into the Cubs and found that I could register a Cub, RAOs and everything, then I was just, that was it. It just ran away then, and here we are. So, yeah, and I've never really, every now and then I might think about GA flying training, but I only think about it for a fleeting moment, and I'm having too much fun with RAOs. It's just the right clientele, the right aircraft. Yeah, the only frustrating thing sometimes is the weight limit. I'm really operating at the heavy end of the weight limit with the Cubs, and so sometimes it's a little bit frustrating there. But that's the way it is, and we all live in hope that the weight limit will increase and everything. But yeah, the way it's run, and like I say, that personal contact, yeah, it's good.
Cool. All right, and this is, I guess, the meat of the chat tonight. You've obviously been flying for a while. You've done a thing or two. You've been involved with one or two organisations. Tell us about some times that things didn't really go according to plan.
Probably one of the first times, and this will be a very short story, but one of the first times was when I first got my private pilot's license. The ag pilot / CFI that checked me, he checked me out in his little Cherokee 140, and at the end of it, he patted me on the back and said, "Congratulations, Dan. Take yourself for a little fly." He jumped out of the plane. I taxied out and took off, and the plane went near vertical on takeoff. And I was only a little fella at the time. I wasn't very heavy at all, and never been very muscly. And I was taking everything I could to push forward on the controls and keep the show on the road. And I eventually got one of my left knee up and put it in the middle of the control column and reached down with my right hand and started trying to trim the plane. And when I did, because I thought, the trim's just fully nose up. But when I went to trim it, I felt something funny down there, and I looked down and all the cable had come into the cockpit. The trim had actually broken. And on that plane, on that plane with the trim broken, it just wanted to go nose up. Now, I'd never been told about this. I didn't know anything about it. I've probably, got around somewhere between 30 and 50 hours and just got my private pilot's license. And I didn't know what to do, but the only thing that came to my mind was just cut the power. And because all that power, and all the power of a Cherokee 140, but the power and the speed is what's making, that's what makes your flight controls effective, isn't it? So I just cut the power, and then I had a bit more control of it, and I just nosed over and did a quick turn back around and landed on the runway. And thankfully, that was the only cure to the problem. Really, was to cut the power, lose some air, lose some speed, lose the prop wash over the tail, and regain control. Like I had a little bit of extra. I could put a bit of muscle into it then without, using my knee in the middle of the controls and stuff. Years and years later, there was a 310 lost at Tamworth. Young fella took off. The rudder trim was hard over. Those aircraft with the rudder trim hard over become uncontrollable. You cannot physically do anything about that once it's picked up speed. That poor guy lost his life, and had he known what was going on, all he had to do was probably raise the nose, cut the power, trim, problem solved. And the same King Air at Essendon, same sort of deal. They found it was the rudder trim hard over. And I think about those accidents all the time, because they were accidents in much more complex aircraft, where you've got the possibility that something's gone wrong with one engine or the other that's causing the loss of control. And therefore, there's a lot more things to consider to fix that problem. But it's just interesting that early in my career, I had this incident with the trim, and it always sticks with me. If I'm taking off in an aircraft and something doesn't feel right, if I'm still near the ground or on the ground, chop. And you've got to really sometimes stop and think and think, what can can I change, that might fix this? And unfortunately, in both the King Air and the 310 case, it would appear that they sort of held the nose down and picked up speed, which only made the problem worse. And that now I'm not criticising the pilots. That's just an awful situation that would be absolutely, mind-boggling to try and work out what was going wrong. And like I say, more complex aircraft, 2 engines, there could be many things that could have been going wrong at the time, but it just turned out to be trim, and I'm just making that comparison. So, yeah. So, it was a good lesson anyway.
What did the flight instructor say when you got back on the ground?
Oh, he walked out. He was ready to tear my head off. He thought I was showing off, and he came storming out towards the aircraft, and I thought, oh no! I saw the look on his face. I thought, man, I'm in trouble. But then when he got to the aircraft, and I pointed to the trim cable all inside the aircraft with me, he shook my hand again and congratulated me, and everyone was happy and everything was good. But yeah, there was a moment there where he thought I was just being an idiot. And, I was only a teenager after all, so there was every chance that I was just being an idiot. And sorry, all the teenagers out there. No offence. And yeah, but anyway, no, it was all good. Yeah, and yeah, as it turns out, that just for someone will ask what the technical reason was, but the trim cable had jumped the pulley and was rubbing on the body of the aircraft for some time and just cut through. So yeah. Yeah. Moving on. Oh,
next
yeah.
time?
Any
time?
questions? Yeah.
And look, anyone who's watching, if you've got any questions about this, please do put them in the comments. We'll put them up and we'll ask Dan. I think it's really important that we use this opportunity to learn. Dan's, done quite a few things and been in more than a couple of sticky situations. So Phil's made a not so much of a question, but a statement. Out of control trim can be a death sentence, as we all well know.
Yep, and like I say, there's those 2 incidences that I know of, and for that reason, like aircraft like the PC-9 had a big yellow and black trim cutoff. So like if you with electric trim aircraft, you can get a trim runaway. So if the trim button gets stuck or something in the electrical system gets out of control, you get a trim runaway in a plane. In an aircraft like a PC-9, that the trim running away on you there is going to cause all world of problems. With that kind of performance. So one of the emergency things that we would always think about, we had to know all our boldface checklists in the Air Force, was the trim runaway, because it is a death sentence if you screw it up. Of course, in an aircraft with an ejection seat, you're just going to bang out if it's really bad. But the thing is sometime before you need to bang out, you should, just deselect the trim system and then problem solved. You'll have to fly it home out of trim, but you can find the speed that suits that trim setting anyway. So that's all you got to do. The aircraft's, if it's got a range of trim, the trim's there for different speeds, basically. So just find the speed that suits the trim and fly to that. So I had electric trim in my yeah.
So it's even bigger aircraft than that. I mean, you look at MCAS as essentially an automated trimming system to prevent a power on stall scenario. It's brought down commercial aircraft.
That's it. So, and with the gift of hindsight, people are criticising those pilots and saying they should have known what to do, and people are criticising Boeing and all that. But yeah, there you go. You've got a system that runs away. People lose their minds. They didn't go to work that day thinking they were going to be wrestling with this big aircraft full of people, and next thing they are, and it's not a scenario they were ready for. They haven't briefed it. They haven't practiced it. They're not ready for it. It's a hard scenario, and it's one of the real tricky ones, is a flight control issue. So yeah. So, yep.
So
you want me to bring up a new issue?
Oh yeah. We'll move on. And as any questions come in, I'll put them up on the screen. And if we've got to jump back, we can jump back. So
yeah. Well, I've got another little story that's a bit of a. I think it's more complicated, and it's one where I made a mistake. But if people look at it and listen to what I say, you'll see the Swiss cheese model. If everyone knows what I'm talking about there, where there's a lineup of things that go wrong that cause the problem, and luckily it didn't get as bad as it could have. It could have this incident could have ended tragically, but we were lucky on the day, and it ended up all good. And what it was in an Air Force King Air, and just as a bit of a lead up to the story, a few weeks before the incident, there was one of the King Airs in the fleet had a fuel leak in the wing root where the fuel leaked into the fuselage of the aircraft, and so that aircraft was on deployment up in North Queensland, and the crew had to just come back home to sail, and the aircraft was left up there, and it was eventually fixed. And then I went up there as a ferry pilot to bring it back down to the base. And when I went up there, it wasn't, it took a little bit of time to sort out the fix, because even though it was fixed, there was still terrible fuel odor in the aircraft, and there was all kinds of, a few little hoops to jump through. So long story short, there was, it was well known to me that this particular aircraft had a fuel leak, and it had to be fixed and everything, because I was heavily involved in it. A few weeks later, I've been assigned that aircraft to head on another trip up to North Queensland. And on the way up, we stopped at a base about sort of halfway over, and we stopped overnight. And when we stopped, the aircraft got filled up that night with fuel. And the next day, we went out, and I was what they call the detachment commander. So I had to sort of, not only was I the captain of this aircraft, but then I'm also got to look after all the crews and sort of just make sure the show's on the road that day, kind of thing. So I was a little bit distracted with that. And in the meantime, my friend, who was the captain of another aircraft there, he pre-flighted my aircraft for me, including doing all the fuel drains on my King Air. And in the process, he got fuel all over his flying suit, and he changed into a fresh flying suit and initially left his flying suit sitting on the stairs of my aircraft. And when I got to my aircraft, I saw the flying suit there with the fuel on it, and I got his flying suit back to him. And then eventually we got in our respective aircraft, shut the doors, and we were ready to go. While I was sitting up in the cockpit, one of the students down the back commented that the aircraft smelt heavily of fuel. And my first thought, because of the experience with this aircraft, my first thought was, oh man, it's leaking again. And because it had been filled at night time in the cool air, and now it was quite warm in the morning, I thought potentially it really was leaking again, because the fuel might have burst through as the tanks expanded, So my very first thought was, we're going to have to cut it, and this aircraft's leaking again. But then I remembered my friend's flying suit sitting there with fuel on it on the steps, and we got on the radio, and I called my friend up in the other aircraft, and I said, hey, when you had that fuel on your flying suit, did you get in our aircraft at all and get fuel through our aircraft? And he said, yeah, I did. He said, in fact, I sat in your seat. And I went, oh, right, okay. And at that point, we sort of, not wanting to upset the whole detachment and all the training objectives that had to be done and everything, we kind of convinced ourselves that just maybe that the fuel smell was coming from him being in our aircraft with the fuel-soaked flying suit on. So we went ahead, started up the aircraft, took off, climbed up, and as we climbed up, the pressurisation system kicks in and the fuel smell went away. Everybody's happy, no fuel smell, so we flew along for, several hundred miles, and eventually in part of the exercise was to go down low and start looking for ships and things. And when we go down low over the ocean, you would depressurise the aircraft, because the pressurisation system locks all the doors, so as people don't open the doors at 30,000 feet. when you're down low, you want to make sure that the doors aren't locked anymore. So as if you have a sudden ditching, everybody can actually get out of the aircraft. So we went down low, we depressurised the aircraft, and about half an hour into flying down low with the aircraft depressurised, shooting down the back pipes up and says, "I can smell fuel, it's making me sick." and I just knew straight away, my heart sank, and I just went, "Oh, it really was a fuel leak. I've just flown this aircraft all the way up here with a leaky fuel tank." I just knew straight away, diverted into Proserpine, got everyone out of the aircraft, and we subsequently, when the floorboards were pulled up in that aircraft, it had about 2 inches of fuel just sloshing around amongst all the avionics and that underneath the floor. So, you know, it was luckily it was just AVTER, luckily, because AVTER is pretty hard to catch on fire, but still, you don't want, you know, tens of litres of fuel, AVTER or what otherwise, flowing around amongst all your electronics underneath the floor.
Well, it's one of those things. It doesn't catch on fire easily until it does, and then when it does, that's the end of it.
Yeah, that much AVTER on fire in the floor of the aircraft would have been really, really bad. And you know, and being that it was amongst all these electronics, you know, you just don't know when something's going to give a little spark or something, especially not when it's not working properly because it's soaked in fuel. So yeah, it was pretty bad, pretty embarrassing sort of incident where it sort of left me with it was right near the end of my time in the RAAF, and it kind of left me feeling pretty unhappy with my whole RAAF career. I thought, oh man, has it come to this? I've done all this flying and got all this experience on this aircraft, and then I fly this thing around with a fuel leak, and I knew it was the first thing. It was the first thing I thought of when we smelt the fuel. I just went, oh, it's got a leaky fuel tank. But we somehow talked ourselves into, you know, I can't remember the conversation exactly with the crew, but it was a conversation. I wasn't the kind of captain to sit there and make everybody's mind up for them. It was a conversation amongst the crew. It was a conversation with the other aircraft. And in the end, we all decided, with groupthink, we all decided it was the smelly flying suit that made the aircraft smell. And that. And I guess the moral of the story is, it's the old gut feeling thing. Right at the start of this whole thing, my gut feeling, or my knowledge even, which is what gut feeling really is, told me what the problem was, and I went against it. So, you know, what would have been the worst case, like the worst thing, if we had have just shut the aircraft down and stayed at that base and got someone to check it, and it was just the smelly flying suit, people might have criticised me for being a little bit touchy about the smell of fuel. But it would have been better than the other option where we flew for a couple of hours with fuel sloshing around in the belly. So, yeah, it was... I know that's why, like, people are probably thinking, how does this relate to recreational aviation? I think it totally relates. You know, like, how many times, like, do people drain fuel on their aircraft and they've got a little bit of a drip on the fuel valve and they just go, oh, it'll be okay. It's only a little drip. But that's a sign of an O-ring that's about to let go probably completely, you know, and there's little things like that when it comes to your fuel and leaks and smells. You really want to exercise caution, especially with our unleaded fuel that we're using mostly in recreational aviation. It's very volatile. It's more volatile than avgas, and you know, you just, yeah, I just take the better to be down here wishing you were up there approach. Yeah.
And I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about something I'm sure you've spoken about with your NAV students. Is it's a classic example of that confirmation bias. You know, you've come to a conclusion. And it also falls into that get home-itis category of when we take unnecessary risks when our experience tells us that we shouldn't. You know, the classic confirmation bias is when you're on a nav, you're not really sure where you are, you're looking at the map, you're looking at the ground, you're looking at features on the map, and then you're pointing out things on the ground and going, that must be that, instead of stopping, looking at your surroundings, trying to use identifiable features, railways, major lakes, major highways, towns, etc., instead of, oh, we're flying over that hill and, oh, look, there's a hill here on the map, we must be that one. It's that confirmation bias that lulls you into a false sense of security that in your case you were lucky. I think nothing serious happened as a result of it. When you're out on a nav and you're lost, or your aircraft's not doing something that you expect it to, and you convince yourself that it's not a problem because you've looked for indicators that tell you it's not a problem, as opposed to observing everything that's going on around you, that you then come unstuck.
Yep. And that's what we did. It's just a really bad coincidence that my friend spilt fuel on his flying suit. If that didn't happen, it wouldn't have even given us that red herring to head off with. I would have just smelt the fuel and said, "That's it. We're all going back to the mess. When that's it for us until this plane gets fixed." And but there was that random red herring in there, and it's just like I say, the holes in the Swiss cheese. It took that one thing to take our mind off the procedure, and off we went. We ran and we confirmed. And we asked the questions and we talked ourselves into it. And then, like with the gift of hindsight, the pressurization just forced the smells out. But once we got rid of the pressurization, it was on like Donkey Kong, So you just got to, I won't enter in. I was about to, when you started talking about navigation, I wanted to tell you how to get the navigation right there. But, it's these things that, to steer away from confirmation bias kind of stuff, is to just stick to your procedures, just stick to what you know is the right thing to do. And I can't help myself, I've got to say it. But with the navigation thing, clock to map to ground, big features, natural features over little features, those things will keep you on the right path, and that. But and when it comes to things like this, that gut feeling, which is really just your subconscious knowledge of things, is very, very important. So sometimes if it just comes down to gut feeling, that's good enough for me nowadays. And look, I'll share something, a confirmation bias story that I've got. The very first time I went out on a nav, and we hear the story. Everyone goes out on their first nav with their instructor. The instructor sits there with his arms crossed, going, "Oh, that's where you think you are, hey? Maybe you might want to look at this." You're probably laughing because you're the instructor's side, and I'm laughing because I've experienced it from the student's side. The very first nav that I did with Joe, we went up to Moree, and we stayed overnight in Moree, and then we went to the Bushflyers muster. Very, very lucky to have Joe do that for me. If you have a relationship with a flying instructor that is willing to do that for you, sorry, this is just a tangent, absolutely hang on to that. Do not do anything to jeopardize that relationship with your instructor, because that is one of the most important things that you can ever have when you're flying, is a good relationship with your instructor. Anyway, we were heading out. We were heading out to the northwest. We were heading up to overfly Coolah, and then we were going to track from Coolah up to I think it was Narrabri, and then Narrabri to Moree. Pretty well a straight shot from Coolah to Moree. Anyway, we were flying out north of Mudgee towards Gulgong, and there's two mines out there. There's Wilpinjong and there's Yulin. You're probably familiar with them, given that you're in the area, and they look very similar. But in the back of my mind, I wasn't thinking about Wilpinjong, because I'd never thought about Wilpinjong, because I'd never driven past it. I'd driven through the area plenty of times. I knew where Yulin was. I knew it was a mine. I looked on the map and I saw a big mine, and I knew what the ground looked like. I knew what the roads looked like on the ground. I knew where the railway lines were. I knew what I should have been looking at. It didn't register that the map said, hey, there's actually another mine next to this one that you know. That's called Wilpinjong, and you're going to come into that one first. And so what happened when we flew over Wilpinjong, in the back of my mind, I went, no, I'm a local. I know the area. I know where everything is. And so I started to ignore the map, look at the ground,
and try and match the mud map that I had in my head of how I thought it should look from the sky to what was happening in the ground. And we ended up about 90 degrees off track. And Joe just sat there with his arms crossed, smiling, and I'm sure he's sitting there like, "Oh yeah, here we go." He's not doing what I've told him to. And all he did was he picked up his finger and he tapped on the compass and said, "Look at the compass, Josh." And I looked up and I'm like, "Hang on, that doesn't make sense," because I had convinced myself that we were over this mine that I knew instead of the mine that was next to it that I wasn't as aware of. And as soon as Joe pointed that out to me, I looked at the map and I went, "Oh, I'm an idiot. I know where we are." Turned and we came back to track, and then the rest of the trip went really well. But it took, and it was only within like 25 minutes of leaving Ralston. So it's not even like we were a long way from home. But it just took that to go, well, hang on, what am I doing here? Like let's make sure that, you know, it's very easy to get into that false sense of security. You know, you've done this 1,000 times before. You know the area. You're a local. It's not a problem. And I actually remember during my flight training when we were doing our local flights around the area, Joe took me over some terrain in an area and did some things, got me to do some steep turns and stuff. To try and disorient me and figure out and try and put me in a position where I didn't know which direction we were pointing or something like that. And me being reasonably good with locations, like I'm a reasonable navigator. If I've been somewhere once, generally speaking, I can take myself there again. When Joe tried to do that to me during my training within the 25 nautical mile in the areas that I knew that I'd seen from the air before, he couldn't do it. He tried a couple of times, and I was a smart ass. And you know, he's like, "Do this steep turn to the left, do this steep turn to the right, do this steep turn to the left, do another steep turn to the left, do this, do that. All right, level off, take us home." And I just went, "It's there." And Joe just looked at me and he's like, "Okay then." So I'm sure when it did actually happen on the nav, he was sitting there like, "Ha, gotcha."
Yep. It's good. It's good that you had that early lesson in that, like, you know, and that's the thing, is to experience these things. Like I say to people, when you're learning, or if you treat all of everything you do as learning, there's no mistakes, just learning points. Like, you know, if you keep doing the same dumb thing over and over again, well, then it's becoming a mistake because you're not learning. But you know, like the first time you do something incorrectly, we'll say, then, and you know, someone points it out to you, or you work it out for yourself, or whatever, then it's a learning point. Yeah. The third time, it's a mistake. It's like, yeah, no, that's good, Josh. Yeah.
How many times have you got to the third time?
Yeah, myself, probably a few in life with some things. Yeah. Usually when you're working under a vehicle and you bang your head and then hit it back on the floor, it's funny when you...
Bang, bang, bang.
Yes. Anyway, we won't go there. It's too painful.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So another time things have gone wrong.
Well, another one I'll talk about. It's another RAAF thing, but still, it involves a twin engine aircraft, you know, and having to shut an engine down. But let's think about this, you know, for all our recreational friends flying a single engine aircraft, a partial power loss. So we're flying along and in a very brand new King Air, and the left engine, the fuel control unit failed basically, and the engine had to be shut down. It wasn't producing power anyway. So we shut the engine down, and we were about halfway between Albury and Canberra, and very high. And the pilot with me, he had he was a really good old Air Force pilot, but he had spent 15 years out of the Air Force in the Flying Doctor Service. And his initial reaction, like, he knew exactly what was going on. He knew his king airs inside out. Before I even, like, I knew that something was going wrong with the engine, but he just goes, "Oh, it's a fuel control unit," you know. And but the thing that was really odd was he just goes, "Oh, let's go back to East Sales." East Sales, miles away over the ranges, and I'm looking straight out the front window at Canberra. And I kind of was like, "Oh, I think we should just go downhill and land at Canberra." And anyway, which we did. And as soon as I said it, like, and to his credit, he was just like, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, we better go to Canberra then." And down we went, and we landed at Canberra. And it was a really interesting thing because it struck me as this very experienced pilot. He just, went right against what was in the checklist, which is land at nearest suitable airfield and everything. And he was just ready to go back and land at this other airport. And
over target country, over tight terrain.
The whole thing, yeah, with one engine failed. And now a lot of people would say the same thing, be thinking already, going, "Oh, but it's a King Air, it's got PD6 engine, the other one's still working. Why not take it back to the maintenance base?" Well, the problem is we don't know why even though he said it was the fuel control unit as why the engine failed, you don't really know. Like, you don't know for sure. What if it was actually crappy fuel, or we're talking about an aircraft with only 200 hours on it anyway? What if the other fuel control unit was put together on the same Friday as that one, and it's about to fail too? Like, you just don't know. And after all, the checklist says land at nearest suitable airfield. Do what the checklist says. But anyway, not criticising my mate who made this decision, I found out a few years later why he did it, and that was when I joined the Flying Doctor Service. That we were doing circuits at Wangaratta, and the guy instructing me, introducing me to the Flying Doctor Service, failed one of the engines, and I just turned around and landed at Wangaratta. And he said, "You should have taken it back to Essendon." And I was like, "Why would I do that? I'm sitting in the circuit at Wangaratta. One engine's just failed. I'm landing at Wangaratta." And we had this same discussion as I had back in the Air Force. And he agreed, and he kind of thought, "Yeah, why did I tell you to go back to Essendon?" But it was a standard operating procedure in the company to take the aircraft back to a maintenance base. And, because it's still got one working engine. And so it wasn't, it was just one of those things. I'm not saying that they were cowboys or whatever. It was just one of those standards that were set at some time in the, in the day, and it just continued until someone like me came along and said, "That's a crazy thing to do," because it's in print in the checklist too, not to do that. And in the end, many people would have flown the aircraft back to the maintenance base, and they'd be patted on the back by management for doing, for getting it back to a maintenance base and not leaving it just out at some random airport. But think about if something went wrong, like if the reason the engine failed was because of fuel contamination or something, something else, and you lost the other engine on the way back, and now you've ploughed an aircraft into somebody's house or something, who's going to be dragged over the coals for that? Like, if you're still alive, the pilot's they're just going to, Kaz is going to pull the checklist straight out and say, "This says land at nearest suitable airfield." But, it doesn't matter what the checklist says. I just say common sense says, better to be down here wishing you're up there, And yeah, sadly, my first flying, and one of the reasons I'm also very passionate about this is one of my first flying instructors died at Tamworth Airport in a twin engine plane that lost an engine. And when he lost the first engine, he decided to land straight in on one of the runways at Tamworth. And to get straight into that runway, because he was a bit high, he did an orbit. And as he was doing the orbit, he lost the second engine. And at that point, we don't know what you can't, we're only guessing what he was thinking. But at that point, he would have been thinking, "Oh my God, I don't want to land this thing in a paddock. I'm going to keep this turn going and put it on the runway." But he never made the turn. It stalled in the turn, and he crashed and died. And that was an important lesson to me very, very early on, is that, partial power or twin engine planes with one engine lost, don't start try not to fall into the trap of assuming that you can keep going or keep doing something because you've still got a little bit of something. Just make yourself safe. Things have gone wrong now. Don't wait for a second emergency. Make yourself safe. Get on the ground. You know, kick yourself later.
Better to be sitting in a farmer's paddock, walking up to the farmer's house, going, yeah, I put a plane in your cornfield," than not being able to have that conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. So, it was just interesting, and like I say, no criticism of my friend who made that decision on the day. The good, like in his defence, the second I sort of said, "No, I think we should do this," crew resource management, he weighed that up in his head straight away and went, "Yes, you're right. Actually, we should do that." But it was just his old way of thinking. That the other company that he was working for had given him this other way of thinking, and that was the first thing he thought of because that's what he had done in the past. So yeah, and I mean, I have, been there when aircraft have been operated with partial power and extended the flight, and everything because it's justifiable because, oh, well, we're over safe ground or whatever. And those things are something, well, when it all works out right, you can justify it. You can say, oh yeah, that's great because we got the aircraft where we wanted it to be to get fixed or whatever. But really, anyone who knows me knows that when it's something like that, if I'm telling a story about something like that in my hangar, I'm pretty critical of it, even if it was me that was involved. If I'm talking, especially if I'm talking in front of impressionable people like students or young people, I say, by the way, this is what you shouldn't do, because I know it's a terrible thing to bring up that do as I say, not as I do kind of thing, but in the end, we all make mistakes and have and we'll do these things sometimes, but it's I'm pretty self-critical of that kind of stuff. So I don't just throw stones at other people who do it. I'll quickly throw stones at myself for doing it too.
Yeah. All right, so we've been going for almost an hour now. There is one last thing that I want to talk about that we discussed earlier, and it's a bit of a fluffy thing, I guess. It's going to talk about emotions and it's going to talk about feelings and there's a lot of we're blokes, we don't talk about feelings. But the reality is that when things do go wrong, it can have quite an effect on us. There can be lasting stresses. There's PTSD. There's all these things that can happen after. Stigmas get associated with people. Oh, you're that guy that did that dumb thing. You had a major accident a few years ago. The airframe was a total loss. There are write-ups about the accident elsewhere on the internet. If people want to know more about what actually happened at that event, you can go look there. I don't want to focus on the accident so much. I want to talk about what happens afterwards. Like, you're there, you're on the ground, you've had a major accident, the aircraft is a total loss. You're about to ring the phone. You're about to pick up the phone and call RAA to say, "Hey, something's gone sideways." What's going through your head? What happens in the weeks after that, and how do you, as a pilot, recover from something like that?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that. Of course, it's always a little bit painful to revisit these things, and so probably the first thing to mention is that every time, I really strongly feel that these things should be shared and talked about, and that to help other people. But it is tough for the person who did it, and that's why if you do know someone who's done that and they're willing to talk about it, you should value that, because it's never easy unless the person's a complete lunatic and they just love talking about it. It's never really easy to talk about. I talk about these things, especially in my hanging discussions with my students, because I feel, it's got to be done. It's another level of hardness now to talk about it on the internet, because there's all these faceless individuals out there watching and being, it's on the internet forever and they can be critical of me. But anyway, that's life. So it's a good question, Josh. So initially, we had the accident at the airport. The poor cub was, by the time I sort of came to my senses, I was on the other side of the runway from the aircraft. I'd gotten out of the cub, dragged my student with me, and I don't even really know how I did all that, but that's, you just do what you have to do at the time, and if someone had a video of it, it'd be very interesting, I'm sure. But anyway, I've looked back over the other side of the runway, and there's my poor little aircraft with its engine torn off and one of the wings torn off, and it's sitting there burning. And your first thoughts, of course, are just dread. Like, you just think, I can't deal with this. Your mind's racing already through insurance and reporting it and the criticisms and what went wrong. It was a day, that accident actually happened on a day where there was no Swiss cheese. We had a good solid block of cheddar cheese. Like, it was, there was actually no real lead up to it. It was just a sheer accident that come out of nowhere due to wake turbulence, and which we'd even given time for and everything. So, in all preparation, we'd done all the right things, and smash, we had an accident. But as things unfolded, like, strangely enough, the aircraft sitting in the middle of the airport on fire with a huge plume of black smoke coming out of it, and people on the airport saw this black smoke and went straight into denial. And one of those people who saw it was a good friend of mine who I'd known for years and years and years, who had a terrible, unfortunate, where he saw another friend crash a plane and it caught fire and that person died. And he saw this plume of black smoke. And speaking of PTSD, it wouldn't have been a good thing for him to see. And he subconsciously knew that I'd crashed, but didn't want to, him and a few other people that saw it just went, no, it's not on the airport. It's somewhere away. But then he ended up ringing, I think, the airport manager or something, and saying, I think you should go out and just see where that is. And then subsequently the airport manager came running down in a 4-wheel drive and was the first person there. Then subsequently the fire brigade and ambulance and police and everybody turned up. I think the fire brigade took about 6 minutes to get there. By then the plane was all completely burned. If we were in it, it would have been awful. But from there on, it's very, in that kind of incident where there's other people there to help you, it's very organised, and you can actually just lean on the system to do its job and just not really worry about doing too much yourself. It's really, I've got to say, it's really good when good emergency services came up. I've got no criticism of anybody on the day. The airport manager, Lindsay Mason, that was looking after Dubbo Airport at the time, was really top, just so good to me and really helpful. The ambulance guys came up and asked all the right questions and check you out and make sure, everything's right. The policemen, they come and they take the details they need. The fire brigade takes the details they need. And all of that stuff starts to put your mind in order too, because they've got that they deal with this stuff all the time. And so by them asking these questions and that, and like, so you've got the 3 emergency services and that asking all these questions, by the end of it, you start to go with the process, and the big, exciting, scary accident becomes a bit of a process of just, this is what happened, and this is what the people need to know. And that I actually rang a friend of mine who works in media. I rang him straight away because one of my biggest fears was, I hate the media reporting on aviation accidents as sensational crash at airport, and all this kind of crap that we see. I just, to say something political, I really hate the way the media report on aviation accidents. So I rang this friend of mine who's in the media and loves aviation, and I said, please help me. We need to report this properly. We need to tell people what happened and report it properly and sensibly and positively, And subsequently, the report that came out in the paper was really, everyone commented on it as a really sort of a positive outcome kind of report, aircraft crashes, both people okay kind of thing. And then after all of that, then it finally gets to talking to Jill and reporting it to ATSB and RAOs and everything. And all of that is just, at first it was very hard to report exactly what happened because we didn't know. Like, we were just there one moment and then put into the ground on our nose the next. But, we reported the facts that we had, and then over time could look at things more, like we got video footage from the airport security cameras and things like that. And over the time started to build a picture of things that I didn't even know that happened, and piece together what actually happened. So it was a really interesting sort of investigation in that. The subsequent emotional cost, I guess, is that is the way you think everyone's going to look at you for this, and there's that perception for, like, I really worry about what people will think of me, and I'm pretty self-conscious and pretty down on myself at the best of times. And then you go and you ride an aircraft off in the middle of the airport, and then you really think, well, this is it. I'm screwed. Everyone's going to look at me and think, what an idiot. And and I know that I'm going to want to be honest, and I know that I'm going to want to tell people about it and fess up to what happened. So I'm not going to go and hide under the bed. And so there was a little bit of, sort of just dealing with that over time, and it's turned out, it really revealed to me, from then till now, like over the years since the accident, that I've got a lot of good people around me, a lot of good friends, and a lot of supportive people, my perception, that my thought that everybody would be out to get me was completely off, and it's a bit of an insult to all the good people around me. And I've kind of since learned, and still learning, that you've got to have a bit of faith in people. Unfortunately, the world is, they do, the keyboard warriors and that will light up on occasion and prove you're right. But in this case, it was really, it was a really good outcome there. It didn't, I don't really, suffer with the flying training. I still love teaching people to fly and everything. I do certain instances, like if the plane tips the same way or something, it sort of jolts me a little bit, and everything. But I find that you've got to look at these things realistically and why it happened. And just have these discussions, try and help other people understand. If there is a lesson to be learned from it, just drag whatever lesson it is out of it, and take responsibility for your part in it, and I don't know, you just got to try and make the most of a bad situation. Yeah.
And obviously you had an aircraft one minute, you didn't the next.
Yeah.
What did the journey to returning to flying look like for you? Like, did you take some time to sort of breathe and collect yourself and work up to it? A lot of people that have had accidents, they talk about jumping back in the pilot's seat and jumping back in the seat with another instructor or another experienced pilot. What did that journey look like for you?
Yeah, very much that. I got straight back in with some experienced friends and just got flying again. I had the second aircraft, which unfortunately I'd actually had a buyer for my second Cub because I only had the second Cub as a demonstration aircraft that I wanted to sell, and the one that I lost was underinsured, and it, just typical. It was just a crap situation financially, but really, realistically, when I came out of it with both my arms and legs, and more importantly, my student came out of it with only one little scratch on his little, like his knuckle of his little finger, I had to look at it and say, well, this is gold. Like the money is the lost money, which I'm still feeling to this day, is just something you've got to work for and get back. And and even if you never get that money back, it's just money. It's so unimportant, really. And that in the end, I just think of that student all the time, and he actually gave me some pictures, these Egyptian pictures, because he's Egyptian, and I've got them up on the wall in my bedroom. So every day I see these pictures and I think of him, and I'm just so glad that he came out of it okay, because in the end, that's what's really important. You've got to like having a plane one moment and not having it the next really turned out to be the least of my problems. It's like I say, I'm still financially sort of hurting because of it at the moment, but that's just work. You just got to work and just make it back, or not make it back, or just change your lifestyle, do something like yeah. If you still got the arms and legs to do stuff, just do stuff, and that yeah, I think yeah, whether or not you should get straight back into flying, well, that's a question for the individual. If I was really distressed by it, and thought that I might overreact to something like that, I'd probably caution people against getting back in to the aircraft if you were physically or mentally feeling not up to standard, especially when you've got to be an instructor and teach people to fly, but just in any case. But no, I felt it was better to just continue and keep flying. Yeah, and in all honesty, I think the relief of seeing my student okay was such a huge relief that it actually had a secondary effect of making me feel really good about the whole thing. It was like it's like getting away with something. It's like, oh wow, look what we did. We just plowed the airfield up with this aircraft and just turned it into a burning heap, and we're both just walking around. I had some bruises and he had this little scratch on his knuckle. And it's kind of like it's almost, I wouldn't say, or well, I will say it's almost euphoric, the feeling of relief and everything, and that sort of, I think, carries you into going flying again if you don't put too much thought into it. Like, yeah.
And I guess maybe this is an opportunity to talk about something that's close to Tim's heart. Tim's heart, helmets. Were you guys wearing helmets?
We were not wearing helmets. I'd stopped. I had a helmet and I'd sold it to a friend because it gave me headaches, and I've got a bad neck that I've had operated on, and even the little weight of a light helmet was causing me problems. But when we had that accident, in the back seat of the Cub, the seatbelts go out fairly wide, and my body got thrown from side to side, and I actually banged my head really hard on the bar work on the side of the cockpit, and it really stunned me. And I felt like, I was stunned enough that it felt like, very close to, you think, boy, the next thing from that would have been being unconscious. And being that aircraft was already well on fire as we got out of it, I thought, wow, if I was knocked unconscious, I wouldn't have got out, and my student might not have got out either, because he was sitting there kind of shocked and not really sure what to do. And so from then on, I got into the bonehead helmets, which are nice and light, and the the funny thing is, the bonehead helmets never caused me a problem. In fact, I find it more comfortable than a headset and a cap and glasses. But yeah, I don't wear the bonehead helmet because I'm a pessimist or something, and I think that we're going to crash all the time and all this. But I just wear it on that basis that if another thing like that did happen and I was to bang my head and be knocked unconscious or even just stunned for a while, it might be the difference between getting myself and the student out, or, you know, getting a few burns or getting fatally burnt or something like that. And, you know, will this ever happen to me again? Well, I bloody hope not. But, you know, should I assume it's never going to happen again? No way. And is wearing the helmet a big inconvenience? No. Like I say, I find it more comfortable. And a lot of the flying I'm doing down amongst the weeds kind of stuff, it just makes sense to be a little bit protective of me noggin. I'd like all my students to wear a helmet too, but I'm not going to enforce that. It is an uncomfortable thought for someone who's just come off the street and wants to learn to fly to then go and say, stick this great big thing on your head or whatever. But the thing is, in the front of my cub, they're generally safer anyway, other than in the case of a bird strike. But most of the birds pull away from us in the cub anyway. But yeah, I do think it's wise for me in my role to wear a helmet. And you know, should everyone wear a helmet? Nah, make your own mind up. Yeah, but if you feel like you're in a situation where you could bang your head on some bar work, what I mean, now here's an interesting thing. I'm going to a little tangent to this, but whenever I do a condition report on an aircraft for someone, one of the questions in the condition report and that is any bar work or that you could hit your head on, or that has it got appropriate you know, coverings like foam or something to stop you injuring yourself against it. And when you look in a lot of standard aircraft, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to badmouth certain aircraft out there, but there is some new build aircraft out there that when people are sitting in them, even people of my height, let alone taller people, your head is up amongst the bar work. And now if you tip that plane onto its roof, which is pretty easy to do, your head's going to hit that bar work really hard, even if you've got your seatbelt done up really tight. And now if the aircraft's on its roof and fuel's going to be coming out of that tank pretty quick and that, there's a pretty big risk of a fire right there, let alone if you've actually injured your head badly from hitting it on the bar work. And sadly, I'm like, when I'm doing those condition reports, I'm constantly reminded of why I wear my helmet, because I look at these aircraft and a lot of the time, and it's terrible when they're a new build aircraft, like, what are you going to say? Like, there's nothing protecting your head from this bar work. And if you did put foam on the bar work, you'd be rubbing your head on it. Like, and I just can't believe some of the engineering that's out there and that. Like I say, I don't want to name aircraft because there's some pretty popular aircraft. But yeah, you know, can you even wear a helmet in those aircraft is the next question. But yeah, it's just something people, I don't want to make people paranoid, but you want to probably have a little look inside your aircraft. And if your head's around that bar work, you've got to think about the aircraft being upside down. I can tell you now, when an aircraft turns upside down, you will find out just how loose your tight seatbelts are. And I mean, just turn an aerobatic aircraft upside down, you'll discover how loose tight seatbelts really are. And if that bar works within an inch of your head, you're going to hit it, and you're going to hit it really, really hard. So I'm not saying wear a helmet, but maybe put some foam on your bar work. So, you know, either or. Yeah.
All right. Well, look, we're going for an hour and a quarter now. Thanks for coming in and having a talk about this. I know it's not the usual subjects that we talk about, but I think it's really important that people do talk about this, and people do, you know, share experiences about the times that things went wrong and what we can learn from them and how we can evolve and you know what, to the people who want to pick, who want to report, who want to say, wag their finger and say you shouldn't be doing that, I would say, well, actually we should, because we need to be talking about this. We shouldn't be treating incidents and accidents and things that go wrong like they should be swept under the rug and like they're taboo. No, absolutely. We need to be talking about these things. We need to be sharing our experiences. We need to be putting our hand up and saying, I did a dumb thing. Don't do what I did.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how I feel. like I say, just harking back to the RAAF, I really liked the way the RAAF was by the time I left it. In fact, people were probably over-reporting stuff when I left, but that's the system that was created. People felt so comfortable reporting stuff that you just reported it, and it was talked about, it was worked out, it was investigated, and it wasn't. It didn't cost you to report stuff. You weren't going to be blamed. It's been over 10 years since I left the RAAF, and I still can't see that happening in the civil system. And if there's something that, it's better in RAAus than I think in GA. But if there was something I'd like to see before I'm dead, I'd like to see the civil system catch up with places like the military and actually allow people to put their hand up and say, look what I did wrong, without being victimised for it by the authorities, and let alone by the keyboard warriors. Stuff the keyboard warrior. Don't worry about them. And that. But it's when the authorities start hammering people, that's really sad. That's a big breakdown in the system.
Yeah, cool. All right, and on a positive, on a little bit more of a positive note, give us the 30-second elevator pitch for Wings Out West. Again, I know we went over this at the beginning of the stream, but who are you? Where are you based? What services do you offer? And what's your backlog? How quickly can people get into to get into your aircraft?
Oh dear, this is more embarrassing than talking about my accidents. I'm not a big salesman, but yes, I'm Dan, Wings Out West. I'm just out of Dubbo. I've got a very big backlog at the moment, just due to dust storms, fires, COVID, you name it. But doesn't mean people shouldn't ring up and start asking the questions about flying training. Yeah, I love teaching recreational flying, and I do low-level endorsements and just give people a bit of an introduction to bush flying. All of my students do forced landings into paddocks, and that I've got permission in a lot of farms around the place, so we can pull the engine and go down into a paddock, and that, which I think is important. And I'm the South Pacific dealer for the American Legend aircraft, which are I think the truest build, like original light Cubs that you can buy. And I think, I love them even more because that accident we talk about, it was of no fault of the aircraft, but it was only because of the aircraft that we walked out of it with so little injury, because it's just such a tough airframe. But so there you go. There's a sales pitch for you. But that's me.
Yeah, cool. All right, and if you're interested, send Dan a message. He's got a Facebook page. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in flying and you're in the area, Dan is certainly approachable. I've been out there a few times. We've still got to organise a time for me to get some stick time with Dan, but it'll happen one day. We've got to get the stars to align perfectly for it. We've been talking about it for a while. Anyway, look, Dan, once again, thanks for coming in. Really do appreciate it. I'll just reiterate something that I said at the beginning of the stream. AOPA had a pilot's announcement earlier with regards to CASA pursuing some pilots for information with regards to community service flights. If you are involved in that, please seek out advice. Go have a look at AOPA's stream that they put up earlier this evening with more information on that. It's really important that people get the right information and take the correct response to that. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not a GA pilot. I don't understand how all of that works, but I do understand enough to know that something stinks and you should seek the appropriate advice for that. Look, once again, Dan, thanks for coming in. And to all the viewers out there, thank you for hanging on. I know this has been longer than usual. As always, may you have runway in front of you, air under your wings, fuel in your tanks. And until next time, cheers.
See you.